Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us in our webinar today. My name is Steve Maher. I'm with Risk Management Professionals, and what I want to do is focus on optimizing your remote HAZOP and LOPA experience. We are using a GoToWebinar interface for a presentation, an updated presentation from the one we gave at the 2018 Global Congress on Process Safety on the same subject with the same title. We have updated a little bit. As you all know, in a couple of years, the software technologies do change quite a bit, so we have provided some updates. As I mentioned, we are using a GoToWebinar interface. The screen that you're seeing has an image of the presenter, that's me, and also the screens that are being shared, the presentation materials itself. Feel free to resize them, shuffle them around, adjust your volume, do whatever you need to do to make it as comfortable as possible. We are doing, and we're going to have a couple of different people involved here. Right now, it's myself doing the presentation for the initial part of it. James Graw is the producer. If you do have any questions, Ricky Hopkins is backing James up. If you have questions or problems of a technical nature, go ahead and call the number on your screen, 949-282-0123, and he will be doing his best to help you out. James is also the producer. He's going to be available by the chat feature that's available as part of GoToWebinar, and that's the same kind of feature that you use later on in the presentation at the end when you have the option to provide either ask questions of the presenter, that's me, or to be taken off mute, and you can go ahead and offer some experiences or tips or something else that you think the other folks would benefit from. Again, everything should work out pretty straightforward, but let's go to the next slide, James. All right, most of you know us. We're a process safety management consultancy specializing in PHAs, and that's really the subject of our webinar today. What we want to do is share you some of the experiences that we've had with remote PHAs, things that have worked well, things that haven't quite worked well, and things you should keep your eyes open to. And hopefully you'll walk away with this with a greater comfort level associated with using some of the new collaboration tools that are already available to you, and how to use them effectively to really do what you need to do. We are going to do some demonstrations on Microsoft Teams. Kayla, Cervera is going to take care of that. Also, James is going to go ahead and provide a little bit of demonstration of GoToMeeting. Those will be later in the presentation. And the key thing, what we want to do is we want to use offer some of our experiences and tips, things that we found to help you deal with the dilemma of the day, which is trying to balance the need for doing process hazard analysis to protect workers in the field and also protect your company's assets from potential hazards that are out there, balanced against the potential health hazards associated with pulling teams together right now. The nice thing is that we've been doing this for quite a while. We've been doing it a lot over the past few weeks, and there are viable mechanisms for getting the job done without endangering people in the field or your workers that are trying to get the PHA done as a team. All right, next. You probably already know enough. You probably don't want to know too much about me. I've been around the block a few times, been in the business for a while, and that's what I want to do is provide an undercurrent of some of the changes that have taken place that make these remote collaboration tools, why they exist, why you'd want to use them under normal circumstances, and why they're especially helpful right now when you're dealing with that dilemma of protecting the workers in the field and also protecting your PHA team. Next. We'll be going through a number of different topics. The front part of it I'm going to go through as quickly as possible, just to give you a little bit of backstory to help you understand what to do with the tools and when to use them effectively. There'll also be a demonstration towards the end before summarizing and opening it up to questions or insights from the various participants in the webinar. Next. All right, so the first thing is why PHA in the first place? PHA is a foundational element of process safety management. Fundamentally, you have to understand the potential hazards before you can manage or control them. That's what PHA is all about. So I'll be presenting a number of tips and ways to deal with remote collaboration techniques and some of the latest software. However, keep in mind that the quality, what you're trying to do with the PHA, quality is number one. These tools are great. They're very effective when used properly. They look terrific. but you're always got to focus on making sure that the nature of the PHA, what are your objectives get done, and quality's got to be number one. Okay, so anyhow, I think we talked about objectives. Next. Okay, so I want to give a little bit of background to discuss where we are with respect to PHA applications in general, where things are going, and some of the demands that are placed on the PHA team, so you know how to use these tools effectively. Next. All right, so this is a little timeline. Some of you, to me, it's almost like looking at a history of my career and my career path as I've been going through things over the past couple decades. One of the things that's nice, well, one of the things that's an undercurrent of all these things is the importance of PHA and the fact that it is a foundational element. HAZOP has been there for quite a while. LOPA has been here for almost 2 decades. And PHA is increasingly the target or the vehicle where you get a lot of things, insights associated with your system. And it's kind of like a ground where you're throwing everything in, where you're not sure how else to deal with it because you got the critical expertise of the PHA team. So again, the remote collaboration and remote PHA techniques we're talking about are a way to try to utilize the effectiveness of the team and try to get out from the team not only the basics of HAZOP and LOPA, but a lot of the new things that have been really lumped on into the PHA effort. If you look at the top timeline on the right-hand side, October 1st, 2017 in California saw refineries as one target for where additional features were required, such as safeguard protection analysis, damage mechanism reviews, hierarchy of hazard control analysis, which all are either done as part of the PHA or in concert with the PHA to achieve those objectives. Again, there's a lot of things that you're able to do with the team of the PHA, so a lot of other things are lumped into the PHA activities or dovetailed with it. These are the kind of things you want to keep in mind when you're dealing with remote collaboration and remote PHA techniques. Next. So there are a number of different PHA techniques. We're going to focus on HAZOP and LOPA as the pivotal elements for getting a lot of different things done. You guys probably recognize fall trees, event trees, bow ties. All these things are useful techniques to be done for specialized applications in concert with basic PHA techniques. But again, HAZOP and LOPA has been the focus for most of industry and the backbone for where all these other techniques are based out of in many cases. And so you want to make sure that your remote collaboration techniques are pivoting on that. And next. So let's talk about a little bit of the evolution of the different technical platforms and collaboration techniques. Next. This particular timeline shows a lot of the development of HAZOP specifically, and later in the 2000s, layer protection analysis. And these are the sort of things, it's interesting looking at this because this core technique of a HAZOP has been around for over 40 years. The technique itself hasn't really changed all that much in concept, but how you do it, other things that we dovetail in with it, getting teams together, use of computers, all these things are things that have been under development in terms of how you go about doing the HAZOP approach, but the basic approach has not changed all that much. So what we're doing is looking at how to use some of the latest remote PHA and remote collaboration software to achieve those objectives and really get the PHA done in a mechanism that's as efficient as possible. And next. So let's talk about some of the different software platforms. Many of you are familiar with these. I'm not going to belabor this or really go into a lot of how do you use them. Many of them are straightforward. In fact, they're pretty intuitive in terms of their ease of use. One of the ones that's come into play over the past couple of years, in fact, really it's come into being in terms of mainstream activities since I did this presentation at the 2018 Global Congress on Process Safety, and that's Microsoft Teams. A lot of people are using that right now. It's an evolution. It's the next stage of evolution from what Microsoft was doing with Skype. Right now, it's included with your most Microsoft Office licenses. You have the ability to share screens, transfer presentation rights, i.e., if you're the one doing the presentation, you can transfer it to somebody else at another location so that they can add their 2 cents or take control of the screens that are being shared. All those things are viable options for most of these software packages, including Microsoft Teams. Video calls, audio calls, use of multiple cameras, being able to share all these devices, integral with Microsoft Teams is basically part of the package. You can also record meetings, you can do instant messaging, either to all the participants or behind the scenes to keep the lines of communication open. You can also formulate permanent subgroups for different PHAs or other activities, so you can activate the subgroups very easily. And if you're working on multiple PHAs or different groups, that one group stops, you can move on to the next one or re-engage it very quickly. It's got plenty of participants. It defaults to 250. You can also engage people without the software itself. They can use it using a web interface. So if you're the one with the license and you're engaging other people, you can go in and invite people to meetings and be able to do that. It is launched directly from the operating system, so you don't have to engage a browser and then start the software. And as I mentioned, you've got audio conferencing capabilities, so you can involve a lot of people. So again, this is one of the mainstream packages that's out there that a lot of people already have access to. Next. GoToMeeting is another very popular software package. It's activated as part of a web browser interface typically. Also has a lot of the same characteristics: screen sharing, being able to transfer the presentation rights, doing video, audio calls, recording the meetings, and having large numbers of participants. Next. WebEx is another package that has very similar capabilities of being able to share the screen, transfer presentation rights, all the basics that you want to be able to do as part of a PHA activity. Zoom is also one, we don't use that very often, but Zoom is another very popular package that some people like to use. Again, similar capabilities, using some of the contemporary hardware and software to get the job done. Next. Skype is one of the, as I mentioned before, Microsoft Teams is basically an evolutionary tool that goes beyond Skype and has a lot of additional functions. Skype capabilities are still retained for the people who have a business license for it, or for folks who are used to that kind of interface. It's got a lot of the same capabilities, but isn't nearly as evolved and powerful as Microsoft Teams. From a business perspective, it is being phased out and being replaced by Teams. Dropbox, Microsoft Teams and the other packages have the ability to transfer files. However, Dropbox is specifically designed for that. You can go ahead and set permissives in terms of the areas of the file structure and folders that you want to share with people. It's an easy platform to use, and there's also a free service that provides you with a lot of storage for a free account that basically can get the job done without a lot of commitment. So that's a quick overview of some of the key packages that are out there. We'll be doing some demonstrations a little bit later in the presentation of a couple of select packages. Again, this isn't a recommendation or endorsement. Please just note that whatever software, if any of these packages are available to you, they use contemporary hardware platforms, and they all have pros and cons, but for the most part, they can all get the job done with respect to what you want to do with respect to remote collaboration and remote PHAs. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about why these tools are there and how they came into being. Next. It's important to understand a little bit of the background so you can understand good usages and not so good usages. As I've mentioned before, these remote collaboration software packages they didn't just come into being over the past few months because of the current health crisis. These are things that have been around for a while and for good reason, and I'll discuss some of the good reasons right now. Next. So business has been driving, business and the way we do business in the process industries has really been driving some of these changes, and the implementation of remote PHA and remote collaboration packages. How we've done business has really forced the evolution of these things and the more common practice. The nice thing right now is if you're starting up a remote PHA, the people at the other end are accustomed to using some of these packages for other purposes, whether they've done video or audio conference calls or some other screen sharing. A lot of times right now in the year 2020, it's not a brand new concept for people, and they're more accustomed, they're more efficient, and they're more able to do this as part of their work activities. So what's been driving this over the past decade or two? Basically, when you're working on large capital projects, usually you've got different groups, different parts of the country, different parts of the world that need to work together, share information, and move quickly towards a result, getting a plant built and operated to minimize that time when you're in the design phase and the construction phase which is when you're not making money to support the reason why you're doing the capital project in the first place. So really there's a lot of financial pressures and more financial pressures now to accelerate project schedule. That's been driving the need for remote collaboration and remote PHAs. Also the use of package vendors. Vendors have been compartmentalizing the work so that you can have different things being done in parallel by specialists in that particular functional activity for your process unit. So using the different package vendors is good in concept, but they need to work together and they need to make sure their interfaces are clear, and that means communication. And it also means communication across multiple languages, different parts of the world, etc. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. There's an increased spreading of financial project risk over many companies. It's more common now to have many different companies invested in a capital project to kind of spread that financial risk. It does spread the benefits too, but it's a common practice right now. And the more companies that you have in play and involved in a project, the more there's a need for remote collaboration. There's also a lot of financial pressures to avoid rework and startup problems. You don't want your commissioning phase to turn into more of a nightmare than it needs to be. There's a lot of financial pressures to avoid rework. All those things drive the need for communication early in the capital project, and these financial pressures have been driving increased application of the software capabilities that are out there. Next. So how are these changes affecting the dynamics of the PHA? Well, you've got more folks involved, so there's larger numbers of stakeholders that got to be involved in the PHA. They may be geographically separated. Also, any delays in a project means financial loss, and it can kill a project if things get delayed too much. Those sort of things mean that more people have to get together and communicate and collaborate on things. And also vendor packages. You need to make sure these things work together. You want to avoid having a vendor package that doesn't work with the rest of your process unit. You don't want a square peg in a round hole. So engaging the vendors directly early in the process to make sure that whatever the package is putting out is what the unit needs and vice versa, those things are very, very important. A lot of the vendor packages come from all over the world. So if you're building a facility in country A and the vendor is in country B, you need to make sure there's good communications, and you can't always do that with plane flights, especially now with the current health challenges. So these changes in the way that we do capital projects really increases the importance of remote collaboration, and remote PHAs are part of that. So next, we have discussed some of the key telecollaboration platforms for a few minutes ago. We talked about the most involved audio, sometimes videos, written communications, file sharing, etc. So what makes a good application? Next. So large projects, when you get large groups of individuals that have to work together, you can't wait for everybody to be available and in one place. It's not only very expensive, but it can delay a project. You don't want that. It can also right now, and I'm hoping that the second bullet in parentheses goes away over the next few months, getting a lot of people together in the same room is cost prohibitive. Can also impact people's health. You don't want that. You want to work efficiently and safely when you're getting any sort of team together. Most of our focus of the discussion today is remote PHAs, but a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of these concepts apply to all phases of plant design and operation. There are many challenges that your colleagues are in. If you're in the safety business, which I presume most of the participants in our webinar are today, most of the attendees, that your other colleagues that are in the design phase or engineering phase are facing similar challenges. They're going to have to use the same kind of concepts, and they do have the same issues to address. So also logistics. If you can't get people together quickly, time is money. You can't afford to waste in a large project. Also, you may need additional resources. You don't want a subject matter expert that has to chime in maybe once every 3 hours to be sitting in a room on a PHA team all day long. Engaging them remotely is quite acceptable. It may be very efficient. Also, the same light, if you got a casual observer, maybe a management team, a project person who kind of needs to listen in, when they're there present in the PHA team, room, I can't tell you how many times this has happened, they kind of feel like they have to be engaged to show that they're doing something. So they may feel like they have to jump in. If it's not pertinent to the PHA or if it's not directly useful to the PHA team, it derails it, it delays things. So by allowing people to use these tools to log in, even if you've got a core PHA team that you're doing all together, and right now a lot of people aren't doing that at all. They're having all their people dispersed all over the place, which is fine. These remote collaboration tools work fine for that. But when you've got even if you've got a core team together, some people it's better if they just phone in or log in using these collaboration tools. So large projects, you get a large group of people together, and they may not all need to have the same degree of involvement. Those are great applications for a remote PHA, or at least some people being remote. Next. So also for small projects, for short PHAs, if you got people coming in from different locations or a facilitator and scribe flying in, the time and cost associated with travel may be a significant fraction of your PHA effort for a small PHA. So there are financial drivers for why you want to use remote PHA techniques and remote collaboration tools just from a financial and efficiency perspective. MOC, management of change, is part of that. These are typically short efforts. Typically, they're short turnaround. A lot of times, they're very time sensitive. You're ready to start up a facility. You need to do an MOC. It's got to get done quickly. You don't want to necessarily wait for people to be able to physically get together. Firing up remote collaboration tools, these are very effective things for making sure this process goes very efficient. Again, these are good applications for remote collaboration, irrespective of the current coronavirus crisis that we're in. And next. So I put together a little slide of things that are of sensible applications. On the right side, where you've got really good applications of remote HAZOP and LOPA MOCs, when you got large groups, multiple locations, fast-paced design projects where time is of the essence and you really need to get people talking to avoid significant design problems later on. Shorter presentations, subject matter experts needed, all those are great applications for remote PHAs. Again, in the current health crisis, we're doing a lot over the past weeks of PHAs where we're in one location, and you got each individual on the PHA team is in different locations, often working out of their house. We've been very impressed with how effective it's been and how cooperative people have been to make sure that it works properly. Very, very impressed with how things have come together with a rapid paradigm shift of people shifting into remote PHAs and remote collaboration activities just over the past few weeks. And it really opens up the opportunity, even when the health crisis is over, to continue using these tools in a financially sensible way, as we've been discussing in terms of what's been the driving force all along. Co-location may still be very good once the health issues are addressed. It may be very cost effective. For operating facilities or units that are longer PHAs, it may be very appropriate. Plus, you might be able to get more operations experience in the same room. And if it's practical, these are all applications where co-location may be more effective. Now, this is something to keep in mind. Over these barriers between using remote PHA or some of these PHAs where you would normally co-locate people, those have come down significantly over the past weeks. We also have encountered several cases where a hybrid technique, where you've got a core team in one location and remote other people in, makes a lot of sense, especially if the people being remoted in are not full-time participants. So there's a big spectrum of things to think about with respect to practical applications. And next. So after you've looked at your application and you've determined that telecollaboration is likely helpful, really planning and preparation are very important. Planning is something you do more long-term. Preparation are things that you do right before the PHA. All of them are very important. So let's talk about some things that are helpful. Next. People. It all boils down to people. Having the right people on the team who are capable and able to work together on any situation is important. It's even more important for remote PHAs or remote collaboration activities. For PHAs, a key person is usually your process engineer, somebody who provides an engineering background. A lot of the things that they might do if they were co-located at the facility may not be an option if you're doing things remotely. They have to be able to interact with process flow diagrams, P&IDs. They should be driving the display in most cases, for describing the system, describing the process, and making sure the team can see the key information they need to help you develop scenarios for the PHA. A lot of times we recommend multiple screens. Our ideal remote PHA has at least two screens, one for the engineering drawings, the other for the PHA notes that are being taken, regardless of what software package you're using. Two screens are very helpful. Sometimes it has to be done with one computer. A lot of this has changed very, very dramatically over the past few weeks. So a lot of people are stuck at home with a single computer. Two screens, being able to flip back and forth is still very helpful. In an ideal world, multiple screens, one for the drawings, one for the notes is ideal. Having P&IDs with a grid format, being able for the process engineer to be able to augment them with annotations on a PDF file, for example, that can be very helpful for illustrating things to a team, keeping them focused. But the process engineer and their capabilities and their ability to do this is very important. So you may have to make a decision when you're pulling this together in the planning phase, who you want involved and how capable they are of doing that. Also, the process engineer is typically your focal point for other process safety information. They have to be able to access it. They have to be able to be the focal point for when people ask questions about flow rates, pressures, and temperatures, etc. It is not acceptable for that person, the process engineer, to not be able to do that and to rely on a facilitator or somebody, facilitators specifically for digging up process safety information. When you look at all the background books on process hazard analysis, there's a clear segregation between the facilitator, whose job it is to facilitate, and the engineer, whose job it is to provide engineering support. That segregation's always been there. That's inherent in our PSM and RMP regulatory requirements. So the engineer's got to be able to be the focal point for process safety information. And if you rely on the facilitator to be that focal point or dig up process safety information, not only is it contrary to the spirit of the regulatory requirements, they may not be the best person to do that. And so you want to make sure that they can do their job. The facilitator and scribe are much busier with a remote PHA than they would be for a co-located study. Next. As I mentioned, the facilitator and scribe are busier for a remote PHA. There's more going on. There's more software packages being exchanged. There's files being exchanged. There's hardware issues that need to get addressed. You can't use an old-fashioned scribe that's accustomed to working on a manual typewriter, to use an exaggeration. The scribe, the facilitator's got a lot more to do in terms of engaging the team, being sensitive to people who are disengaged or distracted doing other things, and trying to drive people remotely. It's doable, it's efficient, but it's the sort of thing that it's a little more taxing on the facilitator. The scribe's got to pick up the slack. The scribe's got to be able to have familiarity with the different techniques, reading engineering drawings, the telecollaboration software. They got to be very expertised on that so they can help the other team members as appropriate if there are the inevitable glitches. They've got to understand the communications environment. Where are they? What are they wireless? Are they wired? What kind of, if there are bandwidth challenges, how to get around that, how to get IT support or other support as necessary. The facilitator can't be responsible for everything. So the scribe is even more important for a remote PHA, and the kind of scribe that can address, work around these little problems is super, super important. What we do is we usually use a newer engineer as a scribe. They can actually, with their engineering background, they pick up more of the PHA discussions, so documentation is better, it's more efficient, and they can provide, because truthfully, younger folks typically find the intuitive nature of a lot of these software packages a little easier to use than, say, somebody my age. So basically, with engaging them, it means that you've solved several problems at once with respect to engineering expertise, with respect to being able to provide some IT support, good understanding of communications technologies, and heck, it's beneficial for them too because they get a lot out of the PHA. So it's even more important for a remote PHA, and it's something that a good solution is often a younger engineer to be the scribe. The scribe can also help with the overall cost balance of doing the remote PHA effectively. And ideally, although I'm really impressed over the past few weeks when I've watched our teams with the scribe at one geographic location and the facilitator in another geographic location, how efficiently and how well they work together. But ideally, you want to co-locate them if it's not a health problem. putting the facilitator and scribe at least in the same area so they can exchange information or communicate in terms of controlling the team and making sure your remote PHA moves forward. So anyhow, again, I'm very impressed with how quickly a lot of companies have adapted to this remote collaboration paradigm. Oh, by the way, I'll offer this. I'll mention this later too. But this is a presentation from the 2018 Global Congress on Process Safety. I did write a paper for that. If anybody wants the paper, just let the producer know or send an email to us after the session today, and we'll make sure we get you a copy of that. And next slide. Okay, other things. This slide is a little bit more oriented towards the hybrid approach that I talked about a little bit ago, where you might have a core team in one location and another team or individuals in a separate location. I did a lot of international PHAs a few years ago, and so I'd be in one country with one team, and we'd have video screen sharing and audio sharing with a team in another country. You really need to have a deputy in that other location that can help pull the team together, go track people down. If there's technical problems, you can bypass whatever software tools you're using, get in touch with them directly. So you want to assign a deputy. Also, one of the things you want to be careful of in terms of picking the team, in terms of planning ahead, is language issues. If you're doing remote PHAs across several countries, there are some people with speech characteristics where I remember one guy, horrible accent, and he sat in the back of the room. He was an important technical contributor, and he had this habit of putting his hand in front of his mouth, mumbling, and the accent was impossible. After he said something, a couple people would be looking at each other going like, what did he say? You want to make sure everybody who's engaged has the ability to contribute. That means not just technical, but the willingness and the ability to be understood by the rest of the team. That's even more important for remote PHAs than co-located activities. And next. Okay, so let's talk about some preparation tips. Again, there's a lot more prep tips in the paper if you want it. I'll go over some of the highlights. These are near-term needs for how to get ready for the PHA. Next. All right, so these are basic things. You want to make sure that that's interesting. Oh, okay, now I'm on the right page here. Never mind. Okay, so you want to make sure that everybody's got the right hardware, that the audio works, displays work, computers work, and software is functional. Cameras may be very useful if you're trying to go beyond just the audio interface and actually have watch the team and have that nonverbal interaction that's often sometimes helpful. Absolutely optional. Don't hesitate to go into a remote PHA with just audio and screen sharing, but sometimes the cameras can be pretty helpful, especially if you got two large teams working together. You want to make sure you have communications access and backup. IT support is very helpful. You want to know who to call to address the inevitable glitches. We do this all the time. We do this every day. In fact, last week we had 2 PHAs running simultaneously just for different groups in this office, maintaining social distancing, but 2 groups in this office. And it works well because we've done it a lot. But especially if you don't use it very often, have your IT support on standby and somebody you can call for some help. Also, can't tell you, it's only happened a few times, but when it does happen, it's very disappointing. Somebody walks into a room for a team meeting 5 minutes before, fires up the computer, and it wants to do Windows updates. Okay, all of a sudden you got your core team or the different people who are all remotely collaborating, all waiting for Windows updates to be performed. You don't want to be in that situation. Do this stuff beforehand. Also, having the latest drivers on your computer makes the equipment work better. Also, the last bullet, it's in blue, test, test, test. Always make sure that you get a subgroup or somebody that can help you check it out with enough time beforehand so that if there's problems, you can deal with it. I can't emphasize that enough. There are always problems. I was talking to James right before the presentation here, and it's with all the things that the computer's doing, it's really amazingly high reliability in terms of even the occasional glitches that you get doing these kind of remote collaboration activities. But test first. Get somebody, make sure it's tested. Next. Also, you want to, if you're going to another site, you want to verify room configuration, the location, checking power and communications connections for all the computer equipment. Make sure you've got enough bandwidth that you can get the job done. Not so much of an issue anymore, but a few years back, some facilities really didn't emphasize bandwidth, or they were using very old systems, and you're trying to get your computer to share screens, share audio, multiple individuals, and it can be a little on the challenge side. Also, make sure your equipment is contemporary and compatible. If somebody's running Windows XP and they've got a computer from the 1990s, maybe it's time to have them borrow some other equipment so they can work effectively with the rest of the team. Next. All these things that are important when you're co-located become even more important when you're doing remote PHAs. Also, from a technical perspective, and this is typically done by the facilitator or scribe, you want to predefine and communicate causes. Doing this up front, I know it's not textbook, but doing this up front provides a framework for the team discussion. You could make sure it's complete, you're not missing key scenarios, helping the team get ready, making sure that it's patterned for future use, being able to quickly locate equipment on the PNID during the session. If you define the causes, identify the PNID number, and even better, a grid location on the PNID means that you can jump right to the cause, get people's attention, have them focus very readily. Also, grouping causes so it makes sense. All that's very helpful for a co-located PHA. It's even more helpful for a remote PHA, and it's really nice if that's done to go ahead and transmit it to the team members ahead of time so they can be thinking about some of the key issues associated with potential process hazards. Also, predefining and communicating questions. You know during the PHA, relief valve set points, relief valve capacities, relief valve design basis, maximum approach pressures under upset conditions. A lot of those are going to come up. So if you're pre-causing, patterning it, getting prepared for that remote PHA, you can get these on the table, send to the engineer, a process engineer ahead of time, so they can give some thought and they can have answers rather than have the entire team sitting around twiddling their thumbs. And next. All right, so this is an opportunity. We're going to do this. As I mentioned, a lot of the features of the software packages are you can transfer presentation rights. The first thing we're going to do is transfer over to Kayla.
You can also utilize Microsoft Teams for remote PHAs. So here is my calendar. I pulled it up in the Microsoft Teams application that you can download. And I'm going to go ahead and click here. So here is the meeting invite. So I'm able to add a title. I'm able to invite required attendees as well as optional here. I go ahead and select my time, my date, and this should be all the information you need to start your meeting. What's also cool about Microsoft Teams is you have a designated files server for that particular meeting. So any files I upload here will be able to be accessed by anyone that I've invited to the meeting and who's ever joining in. This makes it a lot easier than having to transfer documents over email during the meeting. This puts everything in one place to be available to all the team members. I also, to go a step further, you're able to create actual teams here. So I created this fake PHA team site where I'm able to invite the same people that are in the meeting. This gives them another opportunity to have access to files that I want to upload here. What was also very useful that I actually used in a recent remote PHA was this wiki page located on this team site. So we went ahead and put parking lot items here that we came across during the PHA. We went ahead, so for example, this one, verify tag numbers in field for pumps, and I'm actually able to tag people in it. So I tagged James in this one, and they will actually get a notification that, hey, this is something that's on your action item list. So I thought that capability was really useful. So I'm going to go back to my meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and join in. So make sure my mic's on. So once you're joined in, you're able to share your screen here. So I go ahead and click this icon of the screen. I go ahead and click desktop. You're able to share specific windows if you need to. Sharing your entire desktop will allow you to switch through different applications with ease. So here I have kind of a template of PHA Pro. So this is kind of how we are going through our worksheets and our other checklists and whatever is entailed in the PHA Pro, the PHA. So I know a lot of people have a hard time with the sharing of the screen, of the size of the items that pop up. So with PHA Pro, I'm able to zoom in to allow for people to be able to see more clearly over their screen. So that's really useful. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my Teams. Another useful thing is I'm able to have a meeting chat using this icon. So I'm able to not only type messages to my other team members, but I can also share files this way as well. This next icon with the people, I'm currently seeing who's invited, who's currently in my meeting, as well as invite others from my team. So if I go here, I can invite Steve, I can invite whoever I want to the meeting during which the session is going on. This seems really helpful when during the PHA, we don't know specific types of information. We have to pull in an operator or some type of other engineer. So we go ahead and type their name out here, or we can also type in emails here, and that's able to allow us to access the ability to call them. And that's about it. This application's been really useful, and I recommend it to anyone that is possibly going to be performing any upcoming PHAs remotely.
So right now we're going to actually transfer the presentation rights over to another computer and have James give some little demonstration on GoToMeeting.
This is the standard GoToMeetings page that is displayed when you log in, and the next item that you perform is going to be to log in. So once you log in, you can create a free account. It gives you a trial for about 14 days, and you can use that to convince your boss that this is a great tool or what have you. Not to personally endorse this one, but I've used this and I've had a lot of success with it to work with people from all over the country. I had somebody that was in Wisconsin, some other people that were in Oklahoma, and then a lot of other people centralized to California that we worked with previously. So this is your hub that you're going to use, and then to create a meeting, it's very simple. You simply go to create a meeting, and you give your meeting a title, and then you select a time and a duration for your meeting. It's better to go over than under, of course. And I've already started a meeting to use as a demonstration, so we're just going to go to that. However, if you look in this square, you will notice that this is all the information necessary in order to have other people be invited to this meeting. So normally what I do is our company utilizes Outlook. So I simply set an event for this in Outlook, and I send that invitation to everybody. That way other people using Outlook can apply it to their calendar very easily. So once you initiate the meeting, this page will be pulled up. And from here, you will see people come in, and we do not normally broadcast our camera because most of the information that's pertinent to the PHA is going to be demonstrated on your screen. So we simply share our screen. I have one right now. As Steve mentioned, 2 is advisable so that P&IDs can be navigated while the people who are watching your presentation are still looking at your PHA screen. And then the P&ID can be broadcasted to your screen that you're presenting on while you're still switching back and forth between the PHA file. The PHA program that I'm going to demonstrate for you today is called PHA Works. On the left-hand side, in the first column, you'll notice that all the deviations central to a standard PHA are demonstrated. And from there, you're going to navigate between each individual valve and or pressure vessel. This, for example, is a P&ID that we can say, okay, what if a valve or this tank has high level in it? Then you would go to your higher level deviation, type in that cause, and then discuss with your team what kind of deviations would occur, if it's hazardous, and from there you could quantify and apply risk ranking to it. So for now, I'm going to give presentation rights back to Steve so that he can close out. If you have any further questions, feel free to type them in and or contact us via email afterwards.
Am I back?
Not yet. You're back.
Oh, okay, good. All right, excellent. All right, so by the way, if Kayla's exercise gets done a little early, we will shift presentation rights back to her for a little demonstration. So next slide, please. All right, so what I'd like to do is go over a little quick summary of some key concepts before we open it up for questions and other people if they want to share some of their experiences. Next, please. All right, so again, the key thing for a remote PHA, there's nothing there's no real substitute for people getting together. You are going to lose some efficiency. We'd already always characterized it as about 80% efficient, but it really depends on the team. In fact, a lot of the work that we've been doing lately, I've been very impressed with how effective it is. Asymptotically, it's actually approaching the efficiency of a co-located PHA as people get more and more accustomed to being able to work remotely. A lot of it's practice, a lot of it's people being comfortable with it. Then different people have different skill sets, so it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. All these things you've got to juggle when you're dealing with remote collaboration, but I've been very impressed with the classic 80% that we've been using. Seems to be getting higher and higher as people do more of this stuff. But it does require extra planning and preparation. Equipment checks, software checks, making sure things are pre-caused. It really can't be the standard for all PHAs. There are lots of good reasons to get together as soon as the health issues are addressed. But for many important applications, and we've identified quite a few of them, the advantages of remote collaboration, getting things done quickly, getting the important things to work together on large projects, getting large teams to give them the opportunity to work together, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. The remote PHA can accelerate the project of efforts such as capital projects, aid in project control because you're keeping things moving forward, meeting your milestones, getting things done faster, enhancing teamwork, providing a safe environment for team members, which is an issue now, not normally, and result in tangible savings to the owner-operator. All these things are inherent abilities of the remote PHA if it's applied properly and if you think ahead for some of the preparation activities that are important. Next. Although where the future goes with this, it's not crystal clear, but there have already been so many developments over the past few years. It's become a very practical tool to do remote PHAs. You're going to have technological advances that are going to make telecollaboration easier. That's a given. It'll get easier and easier. Better bandwidth, better equipment, more compatible equipment. People are used to doing this. Makes it easier and easier. However, as process safety professionals, we have to continue to adapt, embrace new ways of working together. The figures at the bottom of the screen, back when I started doing HAZOP studies, it was all paper and pencil. The poor scribes that I had would actually take hand notes back in the day. And then, of course, it becomes meetings where you've got computer equipment, screen sharing. Who knows what the future will bring, but there will be advances. It will get better and easier. And as process safety professionals, we need to adapt to make sure that the important job that we do associated with making sure we protect the health and safety of workers, the environment, and also the assets of the owner-operator are properly protected. Just don't let all the computer tools, flashy techniques, pretty colors, or anything else blind you to the fact the core part of a PHA is knowledge of the process, ferreting out potential process hazards, and identifying if there's a need to manage or control them and what mechanisms work best. That's an inherent part of the PHA. Again, these are tools to help us get the job done, and the tools, there are advantages and disadvantages, and it's important to use them properly. I think right now, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions or comments.
So we have a question from James Fairborn. James quoted, only 80% is effective with respect to remote PHAs. And he asks, in which ways have you seen remote PHAs being less effective than in-person sessions? And how have you best overcome those aspects?
Yeah, a lot of it boils down to people. People who are not familiar with remote collaboration activities or are getting distracted from other things that pop up on their computer or even requesting their boss to deal with important issues sometimes with plant operations. Just as you're doing in-person PHAs, remote PHAs, the facilitator's got to be mindful of making sure everybody's engaged. If somebody's not engaged, just go ahead and query them periodically, make sure they're paying attention. If somebody's becoming disengaged and they're a core team member, or you need the expertise, whether it's in person or remote, it's time to pull the plug. And for a remote PHA, specifically pull the plug. But you can't do a job properly if you don't have the participation of the right people on the team. That will drag down efficiency, and also it really kind of nullifies what you're trying to do with the PHA. And also, you don't have to mention names.
All right, our next question is going to be with regards to the 2018 paper. Has it been updated, or is it the original copy?
It's the original copy right now. The key things that are different now is the real drive because of health reasons that make it an imperative that you protect the safety of the team. Also, the software packages that are mentioned in the paper have evolved quite a bit, and in fact, one of the most commonly used techniques now for people who work in a Microsoft Office environment, which is Microsoft Teams. And again, I don't want to or put any plug in for any particular software package. They all have advantages and disadvantages, but that's a fairly new package that's become very commonplace, and so that's not even mentioned in the paper. Given the health issues over the past weeks or a couple of months, a lot of things have changed with respect to the need to do these kind of things. We felt it was more important to get a webinar going to get the word out, have people know how to deal with this effectively, and the paper has not been updated. But thank you for the question.
The next question is with respect to one of the remote softwares that can be used. So using Skype, can the presenter allow other participants to show their screen? My recollection is yes. I haven't used it for a while. If anybody else has some recent experiences, please go ahead and give a thumbs up to the producer using your chat window. Otherwise, I believe that capability still is there. Oh, yeah, actually, this is a good time to talk about the necessity for testing. Regardless of what software package you're using, it's important to make sure it's tested first, and that includes whether you've got legacy packages or whatever you're using. Test it. Make sure it's going to do the things that you want to do, and efficiently and quickly. Also test it under live conditions. If you've got periods, something else to be mindful of, not so much in an office environment. If you're in an office and your office was fully populated, which most offices aren't right now, you'd want to test it during conditions where people are coming in the morning, firing up their computers, downloading large files, and tying up a lot of bandwidth. If it's for a home application right now, the bandwidth densities are varying all across the board right now for people working out of their house. Try to pick a time when it may be a little bit challenging. Test it, make sure it works. If it works under challenging conditions, it'll probably work when you want to use it too. The next question is, by doing remote PHAs and/or LOPAs, do you have a recommendation to how to keep people engaged or monitoring if they're staying engaged? And if it's a longer PHA, what's your recommendation for how frequently you schedule breaks for the team?
Good question. We'll get to the breaks in a second. In terms of keeping people engaged, just as in person, if you want to ask questions frequently, if there's somebody with certain specific knowledge that you need, pose the question directly to them. Wake them up periodically by asking them questions, keeping them engaged with the team. That's one of the best mechanisms to do it. There are cases where I've done different groups, say one group in country A interfacing with another group in country B. Video has been very helpful. A video of looking at that other group can tell if somebody's walked out of the room, or if a key person has walked out of your room. One of your core subject matter experts, you need to stop. You need to stop until you get the right person back in the room. So video can be helpful when you've got large groups. There's a lesser need and more resistance to doing it with individuals working out of their house. But still, if you need somebody's attention to it, get their attention, yell at them, talk to them, and if they don't respond back, pull the plug and wait till you can get them thoroughly engaged in the PHA. The other part of that is breaks. I got asked that the other day. I've done recently here at this office, we've done PHAs that have been full days, 8 to 10 hours is basically a long PHA. You need to break for food. You may be on different time zones, which may require a couple of different lunch breaks or something else. It should require about a little few more breaks than you would normally, but it doesn't need to be radically different. If you were giving people breaks once an hour, that's probably fine for a remote PHA also. If you want to bump up the frequency a little bit for a remote PHA versus another one, versus an in-person one, that's fine. The other part of that is being sensitive to the team's engagement. If they start drifting off or you're sensing that they're not totally engaged in what's going on, time to call a break. Next.
For our next question, we have one of our attendees struggling to share drawings electronically while also sharing PHA software within their presented window. Could you explain a little more detail about the grid technique used for process safety information, such as P&IDs?
Sure. By the way, when people do P&IDs, the engineering contractors in their office, when they're creating your process unit, they've got full-size drawings spread out on a table. They're usually standing right next to each other, pointing out various things, or at least that's the way it was. They may also be doing remote collaboration now, but the problem we've had for many years with remote PHAs is when we inherit those kind of drawings and you're trying to communicate what piece of equipment you're looking at as part of the causal event or the scenarios or a key safeguard, you have to go ahead and describe where it is, what P&ID, upper left-hand corner, lower right-hand corner, whatever. And it's not as efficient as if you got grid marks up and down the sides of the P&IDs, and you can say, all right, I'm looking at the relief valve in grid location B9, and they can go right to that and take a look at it. Now, enhancing that or supplementing that is if you've got, if you're working with your scribe, and if you've got control rights to the P&IDs, usually what I'll do is if it's a PDF drawing, for example, I'll just annotate with a little red box or something around the piece of equipment to get the team's attention and to keep them engaged. So there's a lot of ways to skin the cat here. The grid lines are a good function of any P&ID or PFD printout, so you can get people's attention on it. Alternately, if you're driving the screen, you can put a little red box or draw an arrow next to what you're looking at. It's quick and it gets the team's attention. Next.
The next question is asking you to explain a little more detail. I'm sorry, that's the question we just did. The next question is how you recommend dealing with PHA software licensing restrictions and remote access. Have you seen any issues? What about cybersecurity? Have any clients had an issue or concern about this?
I haven't. Okay, so for cybersecurity, I haven't heard of it being an issue. The key thing is not inviting somebody to your team that you really don't want to be listening into what's going on. With respect to the licenses, you're having a license on the computer where you're taking notes. Two common software packages are PHA Works and PHA Pro. The scribe is going to have an active license on their computer that they're actually actively working with. That's the only license they need to make the software work, and you're just projecting a screen image to the other participants. So to my knowledge, there's no legal impediments to do that, and I certainly haven't heard of any. And we've used both tools in this kind of remote PHA fashion on and off for well over a decade. So I don't believe that there's been any, I have not heard of any concerns expressed by the software licensor. Next.
The next question goes further into team engagement. What are some tips for maintaining team engagement while facilitating remotely?
So I think we kind of addressed that. A key tip is to go ahead And it kind of, okay, so if you're doing an in-person PHA, usually what I try to do is I'll not have the room set up so that the person who's most actively part of the conversation is sitting next to me. That makes it basically has all the conversations in one corner of the room and less the rest of the team less engaged. In the same manner, so what I'll do is put that other person usually at the other side of the room. The level of the volume of the voice is higher. It gets people's attention. Everybody wants to get engaged more. In the same manner, if you're doing a remote PHA as the facilitator, make sure you ask everybody questions. Even if somebody's not, so typically you'll have core team members of, say, an engineer and an operator. They'll do most of the talking. That's good. But you know who else is part of the team? Get them engaged. Even if it's like, hey, do you agree with that? Or did you have any other insights? Make them occasionally get involved so they're less bashful about introducing comments if they want to. And so you know that they're still engaged as part of the team. So that, and also breaking if you feel that people are getting disengaged or requesting breaks. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with a 5-minute break every hour or so. For a remote PHA, it may need to be more frequently. You'll have to use your own judgment. That's part of the overall efficiency issue associated with remote PHAs, is there will be a little bit of loss of that direct face-to-face contacts. Face it, we're all Homo sapiens, and we've all evolved having most of our communication directly to individuals, not to a TV screen or to a camera. That's how we've evolved. That's the most effective way to do things. The remote PHAs are doing their best to make use of modern communications technologies to emulate that as much as possible. You will lose some efficiency. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you do have to be sensitive if people start to drift off. Next.
The next question.
By the way, James is in the same room with me, but we are keeping our social distancing.
The next question is, how are you handling situations where you need visual confirmation of a PNID or PSI? Do you try to ID those ahead of time?
So I'm not sure what visual confirmation is referring to. However, when you're sharing a screen, a typical example, a typical PHA, as I mentioned, ideally, you'd actually have 2 computers, but more frequently, you've only got 1 computer with the ability to either toggle back and forth to the notes files or to the PNID file and project a single image that shows up on other people's screens. Let's get specific. Again, I'm not endorsing any specific software packages, but let's say you're taking notes using PHA Pro, just to use a name, and you've got PNIDs that are on as a PDF file. Well, you've got both as the person with presentation rights. You've got both of those files open. You may take notes 95% of the time with the notes displayed on the screens of everybody else. As appropriate, you toggle back to the PDF file. Identify what area you're looking at. You can, if you're using, again, not to endorse software, but if you're using Adobe Acrobat, you can easily put a red box or something to identify what part of the PNID you're looking at, get the team's attention, flip back to the notes, finish the scenario after you know that everybody's on the same page, literally, and talking about the same thing. Those are good ways to visually get their attention on the right part of the process. You can do the same thing with PFDs, process flow diagrams. You can do the same thing with other process safety information that should be accessible. Now, let's say you're the scribe with a single computer and you have PDF files and the notes files open. Well, notes are being taken. Usually the facilitator is driving it or the scribe is capturing what the team is saying. The facilitator may say, okay, let's take a look at the PNID. Scribe pulls it on the screen. It's projected to everybody. And you use your mouse cursor or you draw a little box around the area that you're talking about. Now, let's say somebody else has a critical part of process safety information. Just as you saw in this presentation, the transfer from the presentation being made by me to James's computer where he was illustrating how to use GoToMeeting, in the same way you transfer presentation rights to the individual who's got the appropriate information. Their screen will then pop up on everybody else's, so they can see exactly what the individual is talking about. That may be useful for relief valve design basis documentation, transmitter set points, etc. So there's a lot of different ways to handle that. I think the key comforting thing that I'd like to relate to everybody, is there really hasn't been any practical problems with modern software in terms of being able to share that kind of information, share presentation rights, and get everybody engaged. Next.
Just to add on to this discussion, how would you maintain momentum in the PHA once it starts to get rolling?
Just like really any PHA, you go ahead and ask questions. Sometimes I will take some liberty if the answer is obvious and ask the scribe to type something and then use that as a framework for allowing the team to take shots at me and some of the stuff that I put down to keep them engaged, keep them thinking, and make them want to participate. One of the things about human nature, and it doesn't apply to everybody, but in general, is people like to be correct. They like to be right. And they like to show off or say, oh, I've done something better. Even if you present a first cut at a possible consequence or what safeguards there might be, or if you're doing a PHA update and you take a look at what the previous team did, some people might say, oh, you're kind of short-circuiting their independent thought on the process. Maybe a little bit of that is true. But my experience is that the current team that you're working with is very anxious to show off, to show that they can do things better or they're smarter. And so they're really likely to get engaged and try to critique or correct what was done before. That's another way to get people engaged, whether the facilitator throws something up on the screen for people to take shots at, or they talk about a previous team's efforts. So again, you could argue that maybe a little bit of the independent thought process is taken off the table, but the reality is a lot of times you're getting them to think harder because they want to criticize and show that they're smarter than the other team or show they're smarter than the facilitator. Anyhow, there's lots of techniques. Every team's different. Everybody's different in this world. Finding a way to interact with folks and keep people moving. It's an art. And like I said, everybody's different. Different things work differently in different situations. Next.
What's your experience using cameras, at least for the facilitator? Does it help keeping the team engaged?
For me, most people don't want to look at my image, but in terms of keeping people engaged, it's really not necessary so much for the facilitator. Hopefully your facilitator's engaged. If the facilitator's not engaged, you got a big problem. But in terms of cameras, I haven't seen it really necessary when you've got the current working environment where you've got remote participants in individual locations, often working out of their house. I have not seen that be a critical issue for needing cameras. Now, I have used them, and I think they've been very helpful, as I mentioned before, when you got two independent teams working at remote locations so that you can see who's at the other end. If they walk out of the room or whatever, you may be having a conversation. I may be in the Philippines having a conversation with somebody in Australia, and I'm still having the conversation. Then I can see in the camera that two other people walk out of the room because they feel they got pulled out by their boss or whatever. Well, hey, that's the time to stop the meeting. Now, it's not quite as practical with individuals in the current environment, but when you've got groups, it works really well. Oh, next.
So considering visual confirmation is where you need somebody to verify something in the field, how are you handling situations where you need visual confirmation of a P&ID or process safety information? Do you try to ID those ahead of time?
Thank you for the confirmation and clarification on the previous question. That's inherent whether you're doing a remote PHA or whether you're doing a altogether PHA. If people need to do field verifications, first of all, you can't emphasize enough. And one of the key problems with PHAs are when people do not properly field verify the process and the P&IDs beforehand. That causes so many complications and such a big loss of efficiency for a PHA. But that's true whether you're working together or doing some sort of remote PHA. Now, even if people have done a good professional job verifying their P&IDs, making sure they're updated, and also the process flows and whatever other cause and effect diagrams or whatever else, PSI, process safety information, has to be correct before you start the PHA. Now, there'll always be little glitches, and as a facilitator, you need to be sensitive to, does everybody understand it enough so I can document this and move on, or do we stop on this scenario, move on to another one, but stop on this scenario, come back to it until you log a parking lot item that people can get resolved when they do field work. So everybody, you got to make that decision in all cases. If field verification is needed, you start making a parking lot list, making a task list for somebody in the field to do it. Even if you're working with an operator working out of their house, they've got the ability to contact the control room or the field operator at the plant site and work with them over the phone to identify what the correct configuration is for what's in the field. So a lot of issues there that I mentioned associated with correct PSI. You will always have little glitches. Little glitches, even if everybody you're working with is working out of their house, if you ask the operator or somebody else who's on your team, you need to have operation support to contact their colleagues. Somebody's got to be in the plant to contact their colleagues in the control room or the field operator to verify things and get back to them. They can go ahead and coordinate that, and then as the facilitator, you come back to that scenario next day, 3 days later, whatever, and get the correct information, make sure it's understood by everybody, and finish that part of the process, part of the PHA. Good question.
So I don't have any more audience questions on the list, but I want you guys to know if you do, go ahead and type them into the chat for the duration of this webinar, or also follow us up with an email. But I have a question for you, Steve. If we're operating a covered process and one of the regulators told us that we could delay our PHA, is this an acceptable approach?
So some facilities operate in environments where you've got multiple regulators that are covering, that are overseeing the process. For example, in California, you have a Cal OSHA. You've got a local, what they call a CUPA, or the fire department in most cases, that is providing oversight on what they call a Cal ARP program. Other states have that too, where they've got local agencies that are providing oversight. And also for a California facility, for many of the higher hazard processes, you've also got the EPA. So you've got a number of different regulators. We've seen this in the past, and in a lot of cases where one regulator might say, oh, don't worry about it, or you can delay your submittal, or you can delay the PHA, don't sweat it. But that's one regulator, and there's two things associated with that. Number one, did they provide it in writing so that you know that they're willing to endorse it if there's a problem later, or if the regulator changes? If person A at the agency says, oh, don't worry about it, they leave, go into another job. A year later, person B comes in and starts fining you for being late. If you don't have it in writing, that can be a problem. Also, even if one agency says in writing, don't worry about it, well, perhaps there's another agency that does want to worry about it. And so if you're not, just by one agency allowing you some slack, the other agencies may not do that. And the other problem is legal. If there's a delay, heaven forbid somebody gets hurt, there's some, how would you explain the fact that you went ahead and allowed a delay of a task like a PHA that's important for protecting the health and safety of workers in the field, when right now, especially with the coronavirus crisis, everybody's been directed to work at home as much as possible. And so the concept of remote collaboration techniques and the ability to get things done is pretty much mainstream at this point. And so being able to justify delaying a PHA or something else because one agency verbally told you that it's okay to do that, to me that would make me very uncomfortable if I was in a position at the owner-operator company being responsible for getting that done. The other part of that is general duty. Some agencies have a general duty concept where if you know that something's a potential hazard and you're not addressing it, there's a lot of regulatory and legal ramifications associated with that. And if you're in that position, if you're in the position of knowing that a PHA needs to get done and you're not taking steps to make sure that the worker safety is properly addressed, then that's also would be a very uncomfortable position to be in. I think that's it. Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience?
Would you like to address the 80% again? The foundation for the 80%?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, that's good. James brought up a good point that I guess I didn't address properly. Where did 80% come from? You saw that on a previous slide, and also you see that in the technical paper. That's experience-based. That's a guesstimate based on some of the experiences we've had. It is totally guesstimate. And also based on past history, we've been doing this for quite a while. Right now, I'd say the efficiency levels are higher, and of course it depends on people and the team. So right now, I think it is higher. You may have problems, but if it's a problem, it's because of the individuals involved or the interfaces that you've set up. In general, it should be higher. In general, even at 80%, compared to even under normal conditions, dragging people in, having them fly back and forth. For shorter PHAs or MOCs, as I mentioned, remote collaboration may still be the best option even without the current health crisis. But again, it is a guesstimate. It is probably a low estimate. You are probably going to experience better results than that because everything's been evolving very nicely. All right, anything else?
No further questions.
All right, okay. Well, gosh, thanks everybody for your participation on this. I know a lot of you are in a position where you're trying to deal with this dilemma and finding a balance between protecting the workers in the field and how do you protect the health of the team and still get your regulatory responsibilities and other professional responsibilities done, and maybe considering remote PHAs as a vehicle to do that. I just want to go ahead and reemphasize, it isn't really all that new. We've been doing it for quite a while. It is becoming commonplace. The current tools make it so much easier than years ago for remote collaboration. So in terms of your comfort level, your ability to do that, I hope the tips that we've been providing, some of our experiences that we've been sharing today are very helpful in terms of allowing you to be able to do that. And as I mentioned before, if you do want a copy of the paper, other than the fact that the software packages are a little bit outdated because, gosh, it was 2 years ago, you should find a lot of the tips and experiences in that paper helpful to allow you to get your job done very efficiently. And of course, if you have any questions, give us a ring. Anyhow, thanks for your participation, everybody. Bye now.